Thestery begins in a lonely frontier settlement, a place of rough cabins and weathered fences set against the wide sweep of desert. Life there is harsh but steady. Families rise with the sun to tend fields, mend tools, and guard their livestock from wolves and rustlers. Yet danger always lingers beyond the horizon, for these lands are not empty. They are contested, and the memory of blood runs deep. On a warm, moonlit night, danger comes riding. The stillness of the settlement shatters beneath the thunder of hooves. Warriors sweep in like shadows with fire in their hands, their cries rising sharp and fierce against the silence. Arrows strike, barns catch flame, and the startled settlers stumble from their beds into chaos. Gunshots crack, but they are scattered and desperate, no match for the raid that engulfs the town. Inside one of the cabins, a young girl wakes to the sound of breaking wood and shouts outside her door. She is scarcely 17, untouched by the roughness of the frontier life that has hardened those around her. In her innocence, she knows neither how to fight nor how to flee. Panic seizes her heart, but instinct whispers a single command: do not move. She throws herself back on her mattress, shuts her eyes tight, and wills her body into stillness. If she can pass for lifeless or unworthy, perhaps she will be spared. The door crashes open. A warrior steps inside, tall and grim, his eyes sweeping the room with the precision of one trained to see weakness and opportunity in a single glance. To him, the raid is no act of savagery but survival, a strike against those who have claimed too much land, too much game, and too much of the future. His gaze falls upon the girl lying motionless. He does not see fear disguised as sleep. He sees only what fate has offered, a maiden taken in conquest. He crosses the room, his movements sure and unhurried, and lifts her from the bed. The girl's heart pounds so loudly she fears it will betray her, but she does not resist. His grip is strong, his arms unyielding, and she feels herself carried as though she were no heavier than a child. In silence, she is taken from her home, neither screaming nor struggling, and in her silence she becomes his captive. Outside, the settlement burns. Flames lick the night sky as the raiders gather their spoils. Livestock bawls, men shout, women wail, and the air is thick with smoke. The young girl is slung over the back of a horse, the rough leather pressing against her body as she is bound in place. She lifts her head only once, long enough to see her village vanishing behind her, a place of ash and fire, a place she may never return to. The war party moves swiftly, their horses carrying them away from the destruction. The girl feels the rhythm of hooves pounding beneath her, carrying her deeper into the desert with every stride. Around her, the warriors speak in words she cannot understand, their voices low and steady, as if the night belongs to them, and always has. For the settlers, left behind, she has already vanished. To them, she is swallowed by flame and darkness, a daughter lost to the merciless raid. But for the warrior who carries her, she is not lost at all. She is taken, a prize, a possession, and perhaps in his eyes, a woman chosen by the will of war. As the night stretches on, the young girl lies silent, the weight of fear pressing heavy on her chest. She does not know where she is being taken or what fate awaits her. All she knows is that her world has ended in fire, and a new one, strange and terrifying, has begun with the pounding hooves of a horse that carries her far from everything she has ever known. The flames of the settlement faded behind them, their glow shrinking to a faint ember swallowed by the horizon. The raiding party pressed onward, horses carrying their riders swiftly into the vast desert. The night was still young, yet the riders moved with urgency, for they knew pursuit might come with the dawn. The young girl clung to the rough leather straps that bound her to the horse. Every stride jolted her body, and the air grew colder as the hours passed. She dared not speak, dared not even look at the warrior who rode beside her. Fear sat heavy in her chest, yet she forced herself into silence, the same silence that had carried her through her capture. If she remained quiet, she reasoned, perhaps she might survive. Around her, the riders moved with the confidence of men born to the saddle. They spoke in low voices in a tongue she could not understand. Their words rolled like the desert wind, sharp and clipped, sometimes breaking into laughter, sometimes falling into solemn quiet. They did not speak to her, nor did they glance her way, as though her presence was already settled, unquestioned, a part of their raid's bounty. The land stretched endlessly ahead, a sea of sand and stone broken only by sparse brush and the distant outline of ridges. Above them the stars blazed bright, unhindered by smoke or cloud casting a pale light upon the riders. To the girl, those stars felt merciless, witnesses to her helplessness. To the warriors, they were guides, constellations known and trusted, showing the path deeper into lands few settlers dared to cross. Her body ached with every passing mile, her wrists burned from the cords, and her head grew heavy with exhaustion. Yet whenever her eyes fluttered shut, the image of her burning home rose again, her family's cabin swallowed by fire, her people's cries lost in the chaos. She opened her eyes again, forcing herself to endure the jarring ride as though to sleep might be to lose even the memory of where she had come from. At intervals, the riders slowed. They gave water to their horses, tore dried meat with their teeth, and passed skins among themselves. None was offered to her until the warrior who had taken her finally held a gourd to her lips. She drank greedily, though the water was warm and bitter. He did not speak nor soften his gaze, but there was no cruelty in the gesture either. It was matter of fact, as though he acknowledged her not as a victim, but as something he now bore responsibility for. When dawn approached, the desert began to change. Shadows stretched long across the sand, and the cool of night gave way to the heat of day. The girl felt the sun on her face, its fire unrelenting, and for the first time, she realized this journey would not end quickly. The raiders had not taken her for ransom, nor would they leave her at some halfway point. She was being carried far into a world not her own. The further they traveled, the more the land seemed to resist life. Water grew scarce, and the earth cracked and hardened. Yet the riders moved with ease, as if each ridge and canyon was known to them, each hidden stream remembered from generations past. The girl realized with a chill that these men did not fear the desert. They belonged to it. By the second night, her strength began to fade. Hunger gnawed at her, and her voice, unused for so long, felt lost within her. She wanted to cry out, to beg for release, but each time the thought rose, she bit it back. To cry was to show weakness, and weakness, she feared, would bring nothing but more pain. She kept her silence, even as despair grew. The horse beneath her carried her deeper into the unknown, the warrior's steady presence a constant shadow. She could not see where the trail would end, but she knew with certainty that her old life had been left behind with the ashes of her village. The long ride into the desert was more than a journey of distance. It was the crossing of a threshold. With each passing mile, the young girl was carried further from her past and closer to a fate she could not yet imagine, a fate written in the dust of the land and in the hands of those who had claimed her. By the second night of the journey, the raiding party halted in a barren stretch of land where stone cliffs rose like jagged teeth, and the desert wind carried the scent of sage. The warriors built small fires, ate sparingly, and let their horses rest. Around them the desert stretched wide and silent, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. The young girl was placed apart from the others, her wrists unbound but her freedom still an illusion. She sat near the shadows, her dress torn, her hair tangled from wind and dust. Hunger gnawed at her, and her body ached from the endless ride, yet her spirit clung stubbornly to silence. If she remained still, perhaps she would pass through this trial untouched, though deep within she knew such hope was fragile. When the fires burned low, the warrior who had taken her rose. He moved with quiet certainty, not with cruelty, but with the weight of tradition behind him. In his eyes, she was no longer merely a captive. She was a woman given to him by conquest, his possession by right of victory. To his people, there was no question in this, only the way it had always been. He beckoned her away from the firelight, toward the edge of the camp where the stars glimmered cold and watchful overhead. Her heart thundered as she obeyed. Her legs trembling with each step. She did not cry out, for she knew no one would answer. She did not resist, for she understood resistance would bring pain. Instead, she stood frozen beneath the vast desert sky, powerless as fate unfolded. The act itself was not born of tenderness. It was not wooing, nor courtship, but the binding of a warrior and his claim. The young girl endured in silence, her body rigid, her mind wandering to memories of home, the warmth of her mother's voice, the safety of walls now turned to ash. Tears slipped down her face, unseen in the starlight. To the warrior, the moment was not cruelty. It was a union sealed beneath the stars, a joining that carried meaning for him if not for her. He did not know her thoughts, nor the breaking of her innocence. He knew only that she now belonged to him, a truth as fixed in his mind as the constellations above. When it was done, he lay back in calm, as though the night had unfolded as it was meant to. The girl, however, felt the weight of despair settle deep within her. She stared up at the sky, its vastness endless, its silence merciless. She knew then that her old life was not only gone but unrecoverable. What had happened beneath the stars would shadow her forever. The desert winds whispered through the sagebrush, and the cries of night creatures rose faintly in the distance. She lay awake long after the warrior had closed his eyes, her body still, her spirit trembling. Though she had survived, she understood survival itself came at a terrible price. That night marked the true beginning of her captivity. She was no longer only a girl stolen in a raid. She was bound in a way she could not break, tied to a man she did not choose, her future swallowed by the desert sky. Days turned to weeks as the raiding party returned to their people. The young girl, once a captive of fire and smoke, was now carried into a village of hides and lodges set deep within the desert. Here, life moved with rhythm. Children played in the dust, women worked with hides and baskets, men hunted the sparse game the land offered. She lived among them in silence. She was given food, water, and shelter, but not freedom. The warrior who had claimed her kept her close, his presence constant, his claim never questioned. To the people around them, she was his woman now, not through choice but through the old ways of conquest. Her tears were seen by no one, for no one asked. Seasons shifted, and with time, her body began to change. At first it was small signs, weariness in the morning, a heaviness in her belly, the strange knowledge that stirred within her though she dared not speak it. She pressed her hand to her stomach in secret, and dread filled her heart. She knew what had been done beneath the stars had taken root within her. The young girl was scarcely more than a child herself, yet now she carried another life. Fear gripped her, not only of the pain to come but of the future it promised. If she bore this child, she would be bound to this world forever. She would no longer belong to the ashes of her home but to the people who had taken her. The warrior noticed her silence deepen, her movements slow. To him, it was a sign of destiny fulfilled. Among his people, children were blessings, proof of strength, of survival. He looked upon her swelling form not with guilt but with pride, as though the spirits themselves had sanctioned their union. But to her, it was a prison she could not escape. Each day her body changed, and with it, the last pieces of her old self slipped away. She longed for her family, for the safety of her home, yet she knew she could never return. What she carried within her would always mark her as part of this new life, a life she had never chosen. At night, when the desert grew quiet, she lay awake listening to the cries of coyotes, the crackle of dying fires, and the slow, steady breathing of the warrior beside her. She placed her hand over her stomach, feeling the faint stirrings within, and tears slid silently down her cheeks. She was caught between two worlds, one destroyed, the other forced upon her, and the child within her was the bridge she could not break. Thus began the whispers of life within her, a truth that bound her more tightly than any cord or knot. She was no longer only the young girl taken in a raid, she was a mother in waiting, her fate sealed not only by the warrior's claim, but by the heartbeat growing inside her. The young girl's life in the village unfolded like a long, unending season. Days passed beneath the burning sun, nights stretched beneath a blanket of stars. Yet within her, there was no peace. She was caught between two worlds, the one she had lost and the one she had been forced into. Among the people, she was treated not with cruelty but with quiet acceptance. Women gave her food, showed her how to grind corn and carry water. Children watched her with curious eyes, sometimes daring to laugh and touch her dress, still different from their own. Yet despite this small kindness, she remained apart, a stranger in every glance, a reminder of conquest. She longed for her home, for the rough-hewn cabin where her family once gathered, for the sound of her father's boots on the porch, for her mother's voice as evening settled. But those things were gone, lost in the fire and the screams of that night. What remained was the life she had now, a life bound to a warrior she had not chosen and a child she had not asked for. The warrior, for his part, saw her struggles but did not understand them. To him, the union was sealed, and her place among his people unquestioned. He offered her food before taking it himself, brought her hides to soften her bed, and expected in return the quiet obedience of a wife. He did not see captivity. He saw destiny, and in his own heart, he believed he had given her a place she should accept. Yet her heart rebelled. Each task she performed for the women of the camp felt like a chain fastened tighter around her. Each step she took beside the warrior deepened the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming. She dreamed of running, of slipping into the desert night and finding her way back to the world she had lost. But each time she thought of it, the child stirring in her belly stopped her. Alone in the desert, she would not survive. The struggle grew sharper as her body changed. Some days she cursed the life within her, seeing it as the bond that trapped her. Other days, when she felt the faint flutter of movement, a strange tenderness arose in her, confusing and frightening. She hated the warrior for what he had taken, yet the life inside her was innocent, caught in the same fate as she was. The people around her did not see her turmoil. They saw only what they expected. A young woman brought into the tribe, soon, to bear a child, fulfilling the order of things. But inside she was torn. One part of her still belonged to the ashes of her home, while another was being drawn inexorably into this new world, whether she willed it or not. The desert offered no answers. Its winds carried her whispers away. Its silence mirrored her own. Yet she knew the struggle within her could not last forever. A choice would come, though she did not yet know what shape it would take. For now, she walked the thin line between two lives, her soul stretched between loss and survival, rebellion and surrender. Time passed, and the desert itself began to weave its influence upon the young girl. What once felt like a prison of sand and stone slowly revealed itself as something more complex. Harsh, yes, but also alive in ways she had not seen before. At first she noticed the small things, the way the dawn turned the horizon to fire, the way the cool air of morning gave her strength. She saw how the people read the land, finding water where she saw only dry earth, hunting game where she thought none could exist. Slowly, unwillingly, she learned their ways, for survival demanded it. The warrior watched her transformation. Though his gaze remained firm and unreadable, he seemed to take quiet pride in her endurance. He did not speak of love, for his people had no such words in the way she once knew them, but he showed his care through actions, sharing his portion when food was scarce, guarding her when they traveled, placing a hand on her arm when storms of sand threatened to swallow them. She resisted at first, shrinking from his touch, closing her heart against him. Yet as the moons passed, her resolve began to crack. She saw him not only as the man who had taken her, but as the man who now stood between her and the desert's cruelty. Without him, she would have been lost. With him, she endured. The people around her accepted her more fully. Women laughed with her, guiding her clumsy hands until she learned their skills. Children clung to her skirts unafraid, seeing not the captive but the mother-to-be. Though she never forgot her home, she began to see that here, too, was a form of life, one that bound her deeper with every passing day. The desert forged bonds in silence, through survival, through endurance. She came to know the rhythm of the land, the meaning of the winds, the comfort of fire under a star-choked sky. And though she never spoke the words aloud, a part of her began to understand the warrior in ways she could not deny. He was not gentle, in the manner of her old world, yet he was steadfast, unwavering. His strength became her shield, and though resentment still lived within her, something else began to stir alongside it. A fragile thread of reliance, perhaps even trust. Thus, the desert shaped them both. The young girl, once helpless and torn, found herself woven into the fabric of a life she had never chosen. The warrior, once conqueror, grew bound to her not only by the act of taking, but by the quiet, unspoken bond formed through survival, through fire, wind, and the endless horizon. The moons had passed, and the young girl's body had grown heavy with life. What began as a secret stirring had become undeniable. The people no longer looked at her as a stranger, but as a mother who would soon bring a child into their world. Some offered her small kindnesses, herbs to ease her discomfort, hands to steady her when she walked. Yet none could soften the fear that grew inside her. When the time came, it was under a sky unlike any she had seen before. A red moon rose above the desert, staining the sands with its glow. The people spoke of omens, of spirits watching, of power in the night sky. To her it was only terror, for she knew the pain that awaited. The birth came upon her swiftly. Her body bent with waves of agony she had never imagined, each one tearing away what remained of the child she once was. The women of the camp gathered around her, guiding her through the storm of pain with firm hands and quiet voices. She clutched the hides beneath her, sweat beading her face, her cries breaking through the night. The warrior stayed close, though apart, standing just beyond the circle of women. His eyes were fixed on her, his face carved from stone, but inside him there stirred something he did not name. He watched her struggle, watched her fight through the fire of bringing forth life. And though he could not ease her pain, he stood rooted, as if his presence alone tethered her to this world. Hours passed, and at last the cries of the young girl were joined by another voice, a newborn's wail, sharp and insistent, rising into the night like a fragile declaration of survival. The women lifted the child, swaddled in hides, and placed it in the young girl's arms. She looked down upon the small face, pale and wrinkled, yet alive and real. In that moment the world shifted. Fear and sorrow did not vanish, but they were joined by something else, an overwhelming rush that gripped her chest and filled her eyes with tears. She had thought of this life within her as a chain, yet, now looking at the fragile being pressed to her heart, she felt a bond deeper than any she had ever known. The warrior stepped forward then, silent but certain. He looked upon the child and the girl holding it, and for the first time, his gaze softened. To him, this was no captive's child, but his own blood, his continuation, the joining of two worlds. He touched the child's forehead gently, almost reverently, and then stepped back. The people celebrated quietly, for new life was precious in the harsh land. Food was shared, songs were sung softly under the red moon, and the camp glowed with the rare warmth of joy. Yet for the young girl, the joy was complicated. The child was hers, flesh of her flesh, yet the life surrounding them was still not her own. She was both mother and prisoner, both nurturer and captive. As the red moon dipped low and the desert grew silent again, the young girl held the child close, her heart torn in ways she could not untangle. This new life bound her irrevocably to the world she had once despised, yet it also gave her a reason to endure. Whatever her fate, she knew she would fight for the small life she now held. Thus, under the blood-red glow of the moon, the desert bore witness to a birth that would bind two worlds together, one of ashes, one of sand, through the fragile cry of a child. Seasons turned, and the child grew. What began as a small bundle of frailty soon became a bright-eyed being who reached for the world with curious hands. The young girl watched her child crawl across the dust, stumble through first steps, and laugh at the smallest wonders. The chase of a lizard, the flutter of an eagle's shadow overhead. The people embraced the child as their own. To them there was no division. The child was born among them, and that was enough. Women carried the little one on their backs. Men lifted the child high and laughed. Children played beside the infant as though no difference existed. Yet for the young girl, every glance at her child was both joy and sorrow. She saw in that small face a reflection of two worlds, the features of her own lost people, softened and mingled with the strength of the warrior's bloodline. The warrior grew fiercely protective of the child. When others laughed and played, his eyes remained sharp, always watchful. He taught the child small hands to grasp, to balance, to hold simple tools. Pride gleamed in his gaze, though he rarely spoke of it. To him the child was proof of destiny, the union of conquest made flesh, a sign that the old ways still held power. The young girl, however, carried a heavier burden. In the child's smile she saw innocence untouched by the violence that had brought it into the world. In the child's eyes she sometimes saw her own reflection, a reminder of who she had once been, before the flames, before the raid. She loved the child fiercely, but that love was sharpened by fear. Would her son or daughter grow to know only the ways of the warrior's people? Would the child forget entirely the life she herself had lost? At night, when the camp slept, she whispered stories from her old world into the child's ears. Tales of fields of green, of cabins safe and warm, of rivers that sang through forests. The child did not understand the words, but she spoke them anyway, desperate to preserve even a fragment of what had been stolen from her. Yet the desert was relentless. It shaped the child as surely as it shaped all who lived within it. The language of the warrior's people became the child's first tongue, their ways the child's first lessons. Though the young girl tried to cling to her past, she saw it slipping further with each passing day. Her child was becoming part of this world, a child of dust and sun, a child of two worlds. And in that truth lay both hope and despair. Hope, for perhaps the child might one day bridge what she could not, the gap between where she had come from and where she had been forced to remain. Despair, for it meant her old life would live on only as faint whispers in her child's memory, destined to fade with time. As she watched her child grow, the young girl came to realize her struggle was no longer only her own. The child's future now rested in the balance, torn between bloodlines, between histories, between two worlds that had clashed in fire and left behind this fragile life. The desert winds carried the laughter of the child across the camp, mingling with the silence of the stars. And though the young girl's heart remained heavy, it beat with a new rhythm, the rhythm of a mother whose fight was no longer for herself, but for the child who bore the weight of two worlds upon its small shoulders. Though seasons passed and life in the desert carved its mark upon her, the young girl never fully surrendered her heart. She had learned the ways of the people, she had carried and borne a child, and she had walked through fire and silence to survive. Yet inside her, a whisper remained, faint but persistent, the call of escape. It often came in the quiet hours of the night, when the campfires burned low and the desert stretched silent beyond the lodges. She would lie awake, her child asleep, beside her, and imagine the world she had lost. She could almost hear her mother's voice calling across the fields, almost see the rough cabin that had once sheltered her. Though she knew the settlement was gone, though she knew her people might never be found, the memory burned bright. It told her she was not wholly of this world. Not yet. The warrior sensed her distance, though he spoke little of it. His eyes sometimes lingered when she stared toward the horizon, as if he knew what she dreamed. Yet he said nothing, perhaps believing the bonds of child and survival would keep her tethered, as unbreakable as rope. But the whisper of freedom grew louder with each passing moon. She watched the men ride out to hunt, saw the trails they took, the ridges they crossed. She learned which nights the guards grew careless, which paths led toward the rivers beyond the desert. Slowly, carefully, she began to plan. The hardest choice weighed upon her heart: the child. She could not leave the little one behind, yet to flee with the child was to risk both their lives. Alone, she might find a way to survive the desert. With a child in her arms, every step would be heavier, every mile longer. Yet when she looked upon the small face pressed against her, she knew there could be no choice at all. If she fled, the child would be with her. Doubt gnawed at her as fiercely as hope urged her on. What if she was caught? The punishment would be severe, perhaps deadly. What if she succeeded? Would the world she returned to even exist? She carried these questions like stones in her breast, yet still she could not silence the call. One night, as the red light of the dying sun gave way to stars, she made her decision. She gathered scraps of food, filled a small skin with water, and held her child close. Her eyes darted to the warrior who lay near the embers, his face calm in slumber. For a moment, her resolve faltered. Despite all that bound and broke her, she saw in him the man who had guarded her through storms, the father of the child in her arms. Her heart twisted, torn between hate, gratitude, and something nameless. But the whisper of escape pressed harder, and she stepped into the shadows. Each movement felt louder than thunder, yet the camp slept. Beyond the last fire, the desert waited, vast and indifferent, ready to swallow her whole. The call of escape had become too strong. Whatever fate lay beyond the sands, she would face it. With her child against her chest, the young girl vanished into the night, a shadow moving away from firelight into the endless dark. The desert was merciless. By day, the sun beat down with burning fury. By night, the cold sank into her bones. With each step, the young girl stumbled beneath the weight of her child, her small bundle of food shrinking quickly, her water skin growing lighter. The desert did not welcome her. It tested her. She pressed on, driven by the thought of freedom, by the faint hope that beyond the ridges and rivers lay a world where she and her child could live without chains. Yet the miles stretched endless, and the child grew restless, crying from thirst and hunger. Her arms ached, her lips cracked, and still she walked. Behind her, she feared pursuit. Perhaps the warrior had awakened and found her gone. Perhaps even now he was riding, his horse's hooves pounding across the sands, following the faint trail she left behind. Each sound of wind across stone made her heart leap. Each cry of a night creature made her fear discovery. Days blurred together. She rationed food, gave the last drops of water to her child, and forced herself onward though her vision dimmed. Freedom was close, she told herself. It had to be close. But with every faltering step, she wondered whether freedom was worth the price the desert demanded. At last, when her strength nearly failed, she stumbled upon a riverbed glistening with thin water. She collapsed, cradling her child as relief washed over her. But her body was broken from the journey, her strength almost gone. She drank deeply, yet the desert's toll could not be undone so easily. It was then she heard hooves. The warrior emerged from the horizon, his horse lathered, his face grim with weariness. He had followed her trail across the wastes, relentless in his pursuit. The young girl's heart froze. Was this the end of her flight? Would she be dragged back, her dream of freedom turned to dust? He dismounted, his shadow falling across her. For a long moment he said nothing, only looked at her, the girl who had defied him, the child who was his blood. His eyes, once sharp as stone, held something heavier, as if he too bore the weight of choices neither could escape. She clutched her child tighter, ready to fight though she had no strength left. But the warrior did not strike. He knelt, offering water instead, as though torn between claim and compassion. In that silence, the price of freedom became clear. For the young girl, freedom was not only the escape from one life into another. It was the cost of survival, the burden of carrying both past and present, the choice of whether to keep fighting or to surrender to what had been forced upon her. The desert had shown her the truth. Freedom was never given freely. It demanded pain, sacrifice, and loss. As the river trickled under the red dusk sky, she realized her journey was not yet ended. Whether she returned, whether she pressed forward, whether she forged a path between, the price would always be hers to pay. And so the tale closed not with rescue or ruin, but with the image of a young girl, her child in her arms, standing between two worlds under the unyielding desert sky.